Dr. John Best. John is a specialist sports and exercise medicine physician. John's worked with elite sports people for many years. He was doctor to the Wallabies for how long, Bestie? 6 or 7 years?
10.
10 years. And it was 10 years when they were winning too.
That's what my mother says.
Yeah, and been involved with elite sports, rugby league, golf, soccer, set up things in the UK. So as well as that, I think John has the gift of healing and is very gifted in that way. He's worked as the men's pastor at Church by the Bridge for a number of years and has put a lot of thought into this, then the idea of living well and then how to apply this to the COVID situation. So, John, thank you very much for being with us. I understand you'll speak to us and then take questions. Is that right, mate?
I thought what I'll do is speak for, say, 15 minutes, then have a little break so we can keep our concentration up and then carry on and take questions at the end. So go for 15 and maybe have 5 minutes for 2 or 3 questions. Is that doable?
Mm-hmm. We're in your hands, mate.
All right. Well, look, we've prayed already, so that's important. And to everyone who is with us today, thank you for your ministry. Thank you for your ministry of the gospel at this very unusual time in history. I hope you have nearby the handout that was sent. It's 5 pages. I decided to populate that with material for your reference. And I guess one of the things I'd like to do as I go through this concept of how to live well and how God has made us, how we're wired, is look at my own personal application and approach, but also allow you to look at how you can use it for yourself, and if appropriate, from time to time from a pastoral perspective. So when we look at how we're wired and how we function best, I think the body, mind, spirit model is well accepted everywhere. And we're at a tremendous time in history where even in the community, in the secular world, spirituality is discussed more and more. My wife, Megan, has researched spirituality and health quite a lot, and it's a language that everyone's using. Even my medical colleagues that get very much caught up on physical health as something that governs everything. There's an existential crisis that's going on at the moment through COVID-19 where people's identity is threatened, their dreams are threatened, there's fear and there's stress with that. And indeed, maybe you're going through that yourself. And if you are, I hope that some points here will help you. The other thing that's interesting at this time, and I've put this on my outline at point 3, is quite a sharp and sudden increase in alcohol use in our community. So 70% of Australians are drinking more, 50% are buying more, which means 20% have got a cellar that they're getting through bit by bit. And you know what? I found that I was doing this as well. My work reduced almost overnight by 70%. So I see patients in the clinic. I work in operating theatres, so elective surgery was ceased. And the mighty NRL that I work with, well, they're not really happening at the moment. And I found that all of a sudden I felt unusual and I was experiencing some anxiety, something that has not been a part of my life and profile. So I've gone back to my normal pattern of alcohol use, which means I always make sure I can drive a car. I try and avoid it Monday to Thursday, and then I'll enjoy it at other times. But it threw me a little. I found that for a couple of weeks I was drinking more than usual. So I hope there will be practical things that come up, and with God's help and his strength, allowing you to do some self-analysis and change. The Bible verses I like to go to in terms of how we're wired and the promises Jesus makes is Mark 12:30, where Jesus calls us to love the Lord totally, heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbour as yourself. And Jesus, I think, tells us that we have a heart, we have a soul, we have a mind, we have our physical being, our strength, and that is part of our humanity. And I think if we ignore that and we just focus, for example, on the spirit or physical things, there are real errors there that can occur. And there's no other medical condition where this is more exemplified as mental health problems. So all aspects of mental health are affected by how we look after our body, how we feed our spirit soul, how we look at our mind. And I'll expand on that. One thing I'd like you to do also is consider as a human being your limitations. So I'm working to the bottom of page 1 there. I quote Jethro, Moses' very good father-in-law, who said to him, "What you are doing is not good. You'll only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone," from Exodus 18. This concept of, particularly if we are burdened to do a good work and we are caught, we can't always say no or create boundaries. We all have a risk of burning out and fatiguing. So organizing yourself well, knowing your limitations, that aspect of self-knowledge is a very powerful thing. And even Jesus himself, as I quote here, in the middle of his busy and demanding schedule, he told his team, his disciples, "Come with me to a quiet place and get some rest." And he did that well. So I'd like to suggest to you that within your health plan, you'll be more successful and more effective if you create schedules regularly. Some of you, I'm sure, are doing that. Maybe others not as strongly as you can. But when you've got days ahead and you think, how am I going to structure this? Keep having a structure, but within that, structure in your rest. Structure in your rest. So what I'd like to do now is flip across to page 2. And actually, before I do that, I went on the FIEC website and I love your mission statement. And I'm just going to read one part of it. It's almost prophetic. In the opening paragraph, there's a sentence that says, "We believe that our greatest hope is not to be found in economic security, advances in science, political stability, or access to good education, which have all been threatened at the moment. As important as these are, we are persuaded that real hope for our world, humanity, and each of us as individuals is only found in a relationship with the Creator and Redeemer, our God and Saviour, Jesus Christ." Amen to that. So all we look at regarding our health, well-being, and with that service underpins your mission statement, I believe. So on page 2, I've presented a model. Now, this is a summary of a men's health book I've been working on, and God willing, I'm almost done, where I'm looking at 5 components of good health, and the 5 components are the letters SS man, SS man. So we're going to dissect each of these components. We're going to look at what it means to have a healthy spirit. How can you achieve good sleep? We're going to look at your medical health as a whole, activity levels, and then nutrition. And these are key components for good health and a flourishing life. And I've got to tell you, this is evidence-based. So there's a lot of work looking at this combination of these parameters. So your spirit, how do we define that? When I discuss this with non-Christian friends, when I present these ideas, I talk about these deep bits within us that give us a sense of purpose and meaning. Now, I'm sure for pretty well all of us here, the gospel is a central part of that. But spirituality and spirit doesn't necessarily have to be religious. So, for example, we know that what 75% of Australians are worried about now are, in fact, seeing family and friends. There's been a number of research studies looking at that over these last few weeks. And then about 50% are fearful about job loss, money, not paying their bills, and so on. But in terms of what gives you a sense of purpose, your essence, it's different for different people. And with COVID-19, this is threatened. So even though we may be gospel and are gospel focused, our ability to serve the gospel is going to be different. Just hearing Michael earlier, what a big challenge for many churches. So hopes and plans around this have been affected very much. And within that, your important relationships and friendships also affect our spirit and can be affected. So within this world and time of social isolation, being able to really nurture your important friendships has been found to be very important for spiritual health. Now, prior to COVID, we had the phenomenon of social media and internet connections and Facebook friends and various forms of connections with people. And we do know that even within that framework, loneliness exists. So loneliness pre-COVID was the major health issue for men in the Western world. So the Centre of Disease Control in the United States lists loneliness as a major health indicator and a major source of ill health in men over the age of 35. It used to be over 50, but now it's younger. And I would suggest that within your own health assessment, make sure there's two or three good friends that you're connecting with, that you can be honest with, you can ask for their prayer support, you're not competing with, and so on. Make the investment. I think it's very, very important. But within that, and in terms of spiritual health, what are some options for us to grow and, in fact, be spiritually stronger during this period? So I'm at the second half of page 2. Now, your isolation may be super busy, or it could be your isolation involves more solitude. But I think it's worth considering how you can change your relationship with God and time with God. I'm very thankful that at the end of last year, I decided that 2020 was a year where I was going to do Bible in a year for the first time. Never done it. So I've been doing Don Carson's For the Love of God through the Gospel Coalition website. Little did I know that at the moment, that has been such an anchor for me to do 4 or 5 chapters a day with a good devotion has been very, very helpful. But I think for each of us, and as pastors yourselves, for those you minister to, really encourage people to make some changes because things are very, very different. As a resource, I found Donald Whitney's book, Spiritual Disciplines for the Christian Life, very, very effective. It's about 25 years old, but he goes through the fairly typical disciplines that each of us practice, such as prayer and Bible reading, and then goes further into other areas such as scripture memorization, the discipline of thankfulness, journaling, watching, and so on, and forms of Christian meditation. And I just want to touch on this before I finish on spirit. I've enjoyed practicing scripture memorization for many years. I follow the Navigator's topical memory system, and we're about to run a short course at church doing their first dozen verses of that. But I think we have an opportunity to practice and even teach meditation on scripture at the moment through forms of mindfulness. This whole approach of appreciating what your circumstances are now, the reality of it, yet from a Christian approach, God is in control. I am with him. He is faithful. And that is a very good antidote for us and for people who are fearful and who at times can be spiritually crushed. Now, here I am, a medico who's done some pastoral work speaking to pastors on this, but I found that has helped me. And I found other things that have helped me has been doing things a little bit differently. The role of music, the role of doing some physical work and praying as you do that. I've been working with a landscaper in our garden at the moment, doing a bit of labouring, which has been very good. And it's been great. He's a Christian man, and it's been great actually praying with him as well as we go along. So these are all little surprises that turn my day into something that's a little bit different. So spiritual health, maybe some changes are worthwhile. We'll go on to page 3, where now I'm going to be looking at sleep. So we're working through these letters, SS man, SS Man is your ship that will take you on your life's journey through smooth parts and rocky parts. So how well are you sleeping at the moment? Well, sleep is absolutely irreplaceable. And interestingly, 75% of Westerners describe their sleep as poor and unrefreshing. But sleep is essential for good recovery. There are massive chemical changes and hormonal changes in our body that occur with sleep, regulating hormones that create stress in our body. So basically, people who undersleep or fatigued tend to have higher levels of hormones such as adrenaline, cortisone or cortisol, serotonin, and all of these can affect your heart rate and give you a sense of fatigue. There are other hormones that also are affected by sleep that affect mood and mental state, serotonin and dopamine, and there are others that affect your appetite and your ability to metabolize food, newer ones such as leptin and ghrelin that we're learning about. We know that during COVID, it's been shown across all countries really that people just aren't sleeping as well. People are waking during the night, they're waking early, and this is obviously an anxiety issue. And may I suggest to you that in this setting, doing and practicing a power nap is a way to refresh. So if you've got disturbed sleep at night, a power nap is a period of time in the order of 20 to 30 minutes, usually not more than that. It's usually mid-afternoon where you try and sleep. It could be you can't and you may choose to just simply rest. If you go beyond that, you can have a bit of a problem called sleep inertia, where you get groggy, you're a bit unproductive the rest of the afternoon, and you may not sleep well that night. But a power nap does offer some degree of refreshment. But in terms of your target sleeping, the World Health Organization recommends that for men, 7 to 8 hours a night is required, and for women, it's roughly 1 to 2 hours more. Now, there are a lot of varieties in this depending on cultural background, climate, and so on. And also the things that affect sleep should be considered. So the use of electronic devices, particularly laser lighting, they tend to have a negative effect on sleep. Instant communication, things that have stressed you, the type of foods you eat, the timing of exercise, that sort of thing. And what I would suggest to you is if you are not able to get to sleep, the one intervention you could look at is what's called your sleep hygiene. Now, I suspect you've heard of this and you may practice it. The sleep hygiene is your practice or discipline of what you do in the 30 to 60 minutes before you try and sleep. So for example, for me, there are certain things I just have to do. I have to have a shower, I have to brush my teeth, I have to pray with my wife. Not that I have to, I enjoy that. But we do that as a habit. I have to have gotten my stuff ready for the next day. I would have stopped looking at emails. I have to make sure that the doors are locked at home. And I try not to eat anything significant within 2 hours, preferably 3, of not sleeping. Now, we may wait for questions regarding details about timing of exercise and foods and so on, but your sleep hygiene is the main determinant of you being able to get to sleep. And once you get to sleep, your pattern will get you into deep sleep, or what's called slow wave sleep, that very good effect that gives you all this restoration. Now, one of the things we know as well, and I haven't seen any recent research on this, that certainly, and Christians aren't immune to this, the use of pornography as a comfort, which then becomes a habit, tends to be more common when people are stressed and have poor sleep, and obviously be on the lookout for that, which is very sensitive. But in my work as a men's pastor, it just came up again and again, and it was a very dark area of research, but it's worth a discussion. And obviously, if it's a problem yourself, please share it with a friend. Okay, your medical health. And I think what I'll do, Al, is I'll finish this section, and that will leave us time to go through exercise and nutrition after we have a couple of questions. The big message here about your medical health is, do you have a good GP? Very, very important. So in Australia, only 20% of men have a regular GP who they trust. In females in Australia, it's about 50%. And we have an increasing prevalence of mental health issues in men. We know that during COVID-19, more and more people are not having contact with their GP regularly, which is a big mistake if you have a condition that needs to be monitored. So if you're having treatment for hypertension, diabetes, thyroid, or other chemical and metabolic disorders, just because you may not be able to get to your GP, it doesn't mean you can't have a consultation. So the federal government has provided new codes, what's called item numbers for telehealth, where GPs can phone you or do a video link and be able to have a consultation with you on that. It's very, very important to do that and have any updated tests, particularly blood tests. It looks like elective surgery will reopen, including simple day procedures such as gastroscopies and colonoscopies. So if you're due to have a checkup, don't be fearful about not following up with that. But the big part of your general health overall is really making sure that you're not a smoker. Nicotine is really bad for health. Try and achieve a healthy body weight, which is a great predictor of health. Achieve a normal blood pressure, and then physical activity, diet, and meaningful relationships all contribute. And we'll go through physical activity and diet in a moment. But please, you must have a good GP. Try and keep a healthy body weight. We'll come to that on the nutrition section. And if you're a smoker, please stop. And for those in your congregation who have taken it up again, and many do as stress management, urge them to try and actually control it or cut it back. Now, Al and Dean, I might just break there. I've been speed talking a little, but I wanted to get through a fair bit of content. I think it might be good for us to take 2 or 3 questions at this time before we press on a bit more.
Yep. Dean, we're in your hands. Anyone or question for anyone? Anyone have a question for Dr. Best? Okay, I'll start. Dr. Best, I can usually get to sleep within 20 seconds. My head hits the pillow, I'm unconscious, but I wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning regularly and just kind of, that's it, thanks for coming. Is that not, I'm not asking am I normal, but is there anything obvious about that?
Well, look, that's not ideal. And you have shared this with me before. So that pattern can occur in families. So just check if it is a familial thing. If it is, that's very tricky. Because you can get to sleep okay, you're obviously tired enough, and the use of medication is not really going to help you, okay? So the sedatives which allow people to switch their mind off, relax and go to sleep, they're very effective for short periods of time. Now, the other option you have is to look at other things that can affect your ability to sleep longer and your body's rhythm. So sunlight exposure is probably a big thing. So I'm not sure how you're doing with that. It's a big call regarding health at the moment. Really, you need to have ideally 20 minutes twice a day, usually at either end of the day. Sunlight exposure releases a hormone called melatonin. It also affects vitamin D levels in the body, which are very important for bone health, very important for immune function. And we now know also vitamin D has some role that's not well understood in mental health. The other thing is your training. I know you train a lot, Al, which is good. You might want to change that up a little bit. So for example, if you do cardio training, your heart rate will be higher. Doing that in the morning's good. But if you're doing a day where you're doing, say, some weights or something for your core, versions of Pilates, maybe try doing that later in the day for a 20 or 30-minute period and see if that affects your sleep. I think that's the best thing.
Roy,
should we press on?
I think Roy had a question.
Yeah,
Yep.
I think most of us drink too much coffee. Do you want to speak to coffee and that and sleep?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Roy. That saves me talking about it in nutrition. So,
oh, sorry.
Look, that's okay. Not at all. Not at all. With coffee, people vary as to how it affects them, but by and large, it is a strong stimulant and a diuretic. So you have a few effects that really work as a very strong drug. If it also causes you to pass urine fairly quickly, it could be you're getting a dehydration effect as well with that. So people who are sensitive to coffee, so people who really feel that coffee will perk them up and make them more alert, by and large, you need to not have any coffee after roughly 1 p.m. Otherwise, it will affect your sleep. So the half-life of caffeine is in the order of 15 hours, which is significant. Yeah. Personally, I'm strongly affected by caffeine. I do like coffee. It's pretty rare I'd have more than one, and I would just have that in the morning and not have any after, say, 10 a.m. There are people who can drink coffee at night and not be affected by it at all. From a ministry perspective, catching up and having coffee with people may now turn into social distance walking, a walk, talk, pray, rather than coffee. I think that's worth a reset and rethink, and maybe something for the future. And the water bottle, carrying the water bottle rather than a coffee, can be a way forward for that. Thank you. Shall we press on?
Yes, mate. I think you could go ahead.
Yeah.
Launch on.
All right. So we're going to look at physical activity. It's a pretty busy page 4, lots of numbers. What I want to say about physical activity is that it also is irreplaceable for health, to the point where physical inactivity is considered as a disease. So not being active is so bad for you. It has all the negative effects as other bad practices such as smoking. And we know that if you are physically active, every system in the body, every bodily system has a positive effect. What we now know that there is a certain sweet spot in terms of the amount people do. So you can actually do too much and become unhealthy. So people's body can break down if they run excessively and get stress fractures, or if you overtrain, as we see with athletes, you can have fatigue and burnout. But basically, there are different components. Now, this works well if you have access to some equipment and if you've got time. So in the box, I've put what's called a complete program, where you look at aerobic training, strength training, and a variation of your aerobic is high intensity interval training. Then you've got flexibility, then you've got balance, and they all do different things. But what I want to sort of share now for COVID is a lot simpler. I really would suggest to you that you need to move every 30 minutes. If you're stationary for a period of 30 minutes, try and just get up and walk. You may choose to do half a dozen squats or lunges or some stretching. Look at how more active you can be, even though you're chained to your computer and at home for longer than you'd like. So within that, I would suggest that you need to diarise your day and plan your day to incorporate activity within that. It's just essential. Now, we also know that you don't have to exercise for long periods of time to have a benefit. So bouts of exercise for as little as 10 to 15 minutes can accumulate and therefore can be effective. Now, it could be that if you can expose yourself to some sunlight at either end of the day, then that also will have a positive effect. Now, some people really try and do a range of activities together where they can do a combination of strength and cardio and balance all together, create what's called a circuit. And rather than just give you one way to do it, I think I'll leave that to questions. But I've put their intensity in a box. Ideally, what you're wanting to do is get to the point where you can do moderate level exercise, where you're sweating slightly or you can speak short sentences. And that would include brisk walking, walking upstairs, a light jog for some people. If you're on a bike, it would be cycling up a hill and so on. But if you're someone who is fit, so you've been training for some time, doing bouts that are more vigorous and more difficult means that your total exercise time can be less. So generally speaking, the target is a minimum of 30 minutes of medium level most days. But if you are more vigorous with that, that can be shorter. And if you're over 60, you need to keep doing your strength and balance work to reduce your risk of falling. I'm 57, by the way, and my balance was very poor until I started working on it. Now, at home, you may not have any equipment, and we can again go through questions with this, but using elastic resistance bands, using other items that can be used as weights, such as bags of rice, tin food. A friend of mine using bottles of wine, that's fine, as long as you don't drop them, I guess. Anything that will load a muscle and can replicate a movement is totally fine at this time. So long story short, make sure you're doing something every day. Try not to be stationary for more than 30 minutes. Have a mixture where you're doing some training for your heart and lung, aerobic, and some degree of strengthening. And try and enjoy it. Creating something that's enjoyable will lead to your compliance. And over time, if you have a buddy, that will lead to your compliance as well. Well, I may get asked about what are the essential movements you should do. Doing squats and lunges, particularly squatting, is found to be very, very effective to keep strength through your core and thighs, which allows you to walk up and down stairs, get out of a chair, walk up hills and so on. Excuse me. We'll go on to nutrition. There was a question that came up about food, which I think, Dean, I might ask you to retrieve that for when we do it later on. Diet and eating is very interesting. People's relationship with food is different. That saying you are what you eat is true. We do have friends who can eat anything and stay, matchstick thin. But what we now know in the West and also in most countries where materialism has progressed, overweightness, obesity, and conditions such as type 2 diabetes and blood pressure are really through the roof now. We're looking at most people, over 2/3 to 3/4 of people in that scenario. During COVID, there's been an opportunity for people to eat differently. There's been a lot of stories about people preparing food at home, having less takeaway and so on, which is handy. But because you are at home, by and large, your risk of eating more is also a danger, I think. And what I would suggest to you, if you do need to change, if you found that you have put on some weight and you want to address this, there's a few things you can do. And I want to talk about a pattern of eating rather than a diet, because only 15% of diets work for any length of time. Now, we know that processed foods and sugars are bad. And I just want to share one bit of more up-to-date research that may help you. Carbohydrates, fats and proteins are the main building blocks of food, and carbohydrates break down into sugars. We used to think that sugars, simple sugars such as lollies, lemonade, ice cream, were different to other forms of carbohydrate, but they're probably not. So things like good bread, muffins, chicken, etc., in many people can break down into these same sugars, which if they accumulate, tend to do two things. They get stored as fat and they affect the way insulin works on your body. If insulin doesn't work well, and it's the main hormone that is affected by sugar levels, what that means is you don't have a capacity for energy to be driven into muscle. That's called insulin resistance, or some people call that pre-diabetes. And then all the food and energy stores turn into fat. So looking at lower carbohydrate use, reducing processed food, sugars, pretty well everyone agrees that that is a healthy way to eat. What that means is that people can have vegetables that grow above the ground in particular, dairy, as long as the cholesterol is not a huge problem, meats, and healthy fats. So healthy fats will include nuts, avocado, cooking with healthy oils such as almond oil, olive oil, that sort of thing. Now, I personally practiced this. It changed my health significantly. It allowed me to move into a slightly overweight to a healthy weight range pretty quickly. And it also means that I can do a practice of intermittent fasting, which I've incorporated into my prayer life quite some time ago. So usually one day in a week, I will pray and fast with that. So technically a fast is to not eat for a 24-hour period. So that would mean if I had dinner last night, I would not eat dinner again till tonight. And you may have bouts of hunger, which can be controlled very simply by using black tea or some lemon in hot water. Some people use cooking salts that are appetite suppressants, but there's no calories in that. But I actually don't turn that just into a dietary exercise. It's become a habit where I can pick a person or a situation that most hours in the day I'll pray briefly for. So it's been very helpful to not be distracted by food and incorporate this. And people who tend to have low carbohydrate diets tend to be able to eat well and be able to fast from time to time with that. So look, I'll finish up here so we've got time for some questions. But the main thing the research is showing us regarding who's doing well during COVID are people who have a lot of structure to how they organize their day, people who remain active, people who are connected with their friends, which seems to influence their spirit, people who manage good sleep, and people who are not using excessive amounts of alcohol and being careful with food and weight. All these measures, and I would suggest if we underpin this with prayer, will help us to be healthier, to live well, to be able to serve well also, and particularly adapt as things change. So look, I'll leave it there, and I'll leave it to you or Dean Al to take some questions.
John, I could start with one from one of our guys asks, any good times for healthy eating? He says, all my good habits have gone out the window. Lots of comfort eating. Takeaway food seems to be all high carb.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Any comments?
Yeah, I feel for you. The other problem with carbohydrate is that it's addictive. So if you've had a sandwich or something that's sweet as well, you'll get hungry again in 1.5 to 2 hours. If you have eggs and bacon, you won't be hungry for a while because you've had healthy fats that will control that. Just with that Andrew Mitchell chicken, chicken has high carbohydrates, so you just need to be a bit careful with that. Now, for the person who's been very honest with us about your healthy habits going, I do feel for you. And the comfort eating is there because things are difficult at the time. I think the better way forward is probably starting right now, doing a fairly dramatic reset, and actually writing out and planning what you're going to eat and drink and what you're going to do. If you get through the first 3 days, you'll get through the next week more likely. If you get through a week, you'll start to actually enjoy the benefits from that. So I would say what you're needing to do is just really organize how you're going to eat, with a big focus on increasing your vegetable use, having cold meats in the fridge, cheeses as well. And if you're really, really hungry, rather than eat other things that are sweet, just having a small 2 or 3 nuts, which will suppress your appetite and control that for a while. And do a bit of self-analysis on why you're needing the comfort food as well. And if that correlates to a time of anxiety, turn that into a prayer, Philippians 4, straight away. And do that again and again and again until you have some comfort. I really think that's important. And your GP should help with some advice on that as well, if you're needing extra information.
Anyone got questions for Dr. Best?
Yeah, John, you mentioned earlier about how to have a good kind of sleeping pattern, it's better to have cardio in the morning and then more kind of weightlifting in the afternoon. Are there any more? Would you have any more tips for exercising well and how it fits in with sleep?
Yeah. So when you look at athletes, particularly those that have competitions or performances at night, it takes them many, many hours for their body to slow down so they can sleep. So my point was, when you're looking at training where your heart rate is up, your hormone changes with that, particularly adrenaline, stay up for a few hours. So try and get that done in the morning. If you're looking at doing some exercise on your core, doing weights, doing flexibility or balance work, look at doing that in the evening, but you would still need at least 2 or 3 hours break before it's lights out. Okay, that would be my main advice with that. And around that time, you've got to work out how you're going to eat as well. That would be my main suggestion there.
John, is there somewhere where the kind of, if you like, how can I put it, the rules of healthy eating are available? I get mixed up in what you can eat and what you can't. And
yeah, so look, I'm writing down the questions I'm getting asked so I can do a little summary to send around. But just to give people a resource now, there's a very, very good book by Dr. Peter Bruckner, Brukner. Some of you may have seen a piece. Peter's a colleague and friend of mine. He's a sports physician from Melbourne who is in his late 60s, and he actually did a piece in the Sydney Morning Herald on what he's doing to stay healthy during COVID. But he's written a book called A Fat Lot of Good, A Fat Lot of Good. And it's a very good book looking at food and some of the science around it. But within that, there are also recipes and so on. An alternate, if you're interested in pursuing lower processed foods, is a book that was a bestseller for many years called What the Fat? What the Fat? It's written by 3 people, a journalist, a dietitian, and a scientist. Grant Schofield, a Kiwi, is the scientist. That's particularly good because it's got a lot of stuff on shopping, recipes, and what your pantry and fridge are going to look like once you've bought the right things. It's impossible to escape carbohydrates in the community. It's everywhere. The food industry basically really pushed carbohydrates hard in the late 70s, and there's a knock-on effect from that. That's another conversation. There was a question that came up that I missed about intermittent fasting.
Yes, here it is from Chris. If you choose to use intermittent fasting, can it be a set day each week, or is it best to change it around?
Okay, so there are other ways of reducing your calorie intake. So that will include things like the 16-8 diet or 5-2. The 16-8 is basically where you have very little food and calories in 16 hours and you have most of your food in 8 hours. That's probably what I do anyway. So I found that by reducing carbohydrates, my appetites drop right down. It's very, very rare I'd have 3 meals in a day these days. I tend to have 2. So I would usually have something around lunchtime and then in the evening. I tend not to have breakfast these days. I'm just not hungry. The 5-2 is where you have 2 consecutive days of low-calorie diet. So Michael Mosley, who's profiled very highly on SBS in the media, he's done very good work on this. And the other 5 days are fairly normal eating. By and large, men do better with these sorts of eatings. For women, it's more difficult because of hormonal issues, but it's still worth trying. And it's going to be different for anybody. Now, in terms of your time of fasting, I don't think it really matters. I do a 3-day fast 4 times a year. There's a medical reasons for that, so it's not spiritual. I'll be honest with you all on that. But that resets what's called the mitochondria, which are the little engine devices in cells that give us energy and burn calories. So we're going to see more and more on this that is getting into the general scientific realms where there's good evidence, but you won't get this supported by pharmaceutical companies. They want everyone to have blood pressure and cholesterol problems and sugar problems so medications can be used. It's just the truth.
Which leads nicely to the question from Uni Church in Queensland. Any advice on keeping blood pressure down? Yes.
Well, make sure you're in touch with your GP about the cause of elevated blood pressure. But the main things that influence blood pressure are genetics. So essential hypertension is passed through families, body weight, inactivity, and then foods. And then on top of that, you have stress. I would suggest that if stress is a factor, breathing techniques and relaxation techniques are worthwhile, where you'll spend anywhere between 1 and 5 minutes having a period of time where you just slow down your breathing and relax. You may choose to meditate on some scripture or listen to some music of your choice at that time. A few years ago, I needed to do that, and it helped me quite a lot. I thought I was going to need some medication, but I didn't. And so there are many reasons for it. But if you do feel stress is a factor and you are being active and your weight's good, look at techniques of breathing and relaxation for that. And I can put some YouTube clips together for that.
We can see. John, here's one that's quite important from Jen Wright. Confused by the statements about chicken. I can't understand how it can have carbs. My son has type 1 diabetes and chicken is described as, quote, free food, unquote, that has no carbs. His levels have never been affected by chicken.
Yeah, so I shouldn't have probably mentioned that, but if you look at all the meats, chicken has more carbs than any of the meats, is really what I was trying to say. So I was saying it in the context of you can have meats in a low carb eating pattern. The only thing that chicken does do in certain people, it can be inflammatory. So it breaks down into omega-6s, which are an inflammatory product. So don't worry about that for your son with diabetes. That's all fine.
Okay.
Apologies for the confusion.
That's right. It's three o'clock. I guess we've got
How many
time.
people are still on? Yeah.
They're all 37, 38 participants. Like it's good. You've kept them. You've kept them, Dr. Best.
But it's a big topic.
Do you want to?
Could you just
one
just
more?
wait half? Just wait half. I can go 10 more minutes if that's convenient.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Folks, if you need to leave the meeting, we said 3. You can, and we'll put up the full recording on the FIEC website.
So there's a question from someone about there seems to be an intensity to meetings on Zoom that is quite different when we meet in person. I'm feeling that some things need to be shorter. Maybe that's this meeting. What do you say about that, John?
So it's true. It's true. I think. I don't know if that's reflected because there's a time pressure. I don't know if it's the issue of being less personal, but it is the way we're communicating at the moment. I think the thing that's even practically very hard, I'm trying to look at the screen, but my camera is not directly, it's to the left of my screen. I'm using an iPad at the moment. I don't know if there's any way around it. One thing I found is I think it's sometimes better just to have a phone conversation rather than look at each other. That may be a better option, and just giving people a chance to sort of talk and listening to their tone. I encourage letter writing as well in terms of communication, but that's not a meeting set up. So I don't think there's an easy way, Dean. Yeah, I don't think there's an easy way. It won't be forever, but it's still going to be a part of our lives. No question.
It's now official FIEC head office policy that no Zoom meeting ever goes more than 2 hours. Absolutely. After that, you're looking for a snake to hug or poke yourself in the eye with a pencil. All right. So we've got another few minutes, though, that Dr. Best is available. Any other questions?
It's Sue Ellen here. I've talked about people who perhaps have given up smoking or alcohol, going back to that, a bit disturbing and concerning. And I suppose I'm just thinking about how to broach that with people, given that we don't see them in person. But yeah, to actually put it out there, there seems to be a bit of wisdom in that, to bring it out into the open as a reality. Any thoughts on that?
Thank you. I think looking at the body, mind, spirit model and looking at the world and our lives being different and an existential crisis that affects people differently. Obviously, alcohol, nicotine, comfort eating, other habits that may not be healthy, I think all can be grouped together. I really think so. So I think helping people look at what's the main thing they're worried about. If they were to look back on their year, what is something they hope will come out of this year? So giving them something to look forward to, I think is very, very important. Encouraging and looking at their relationship with God and how they feel God fits into this at the moment, I think that's very, very important. Not everyone really wants to believe that God's in control. The idea of God allowing this to happen, and you look at the sadness in the nursing home in Western Sydney, the Anglicare nursing home, where without a miracle there'll be more deaths there, and where is God in all of this? So they're legitimate concerns. So I think there's great pastoral opportunities with that, and I think the alcohol and the nicotine use is just another form of comfort. I've never been a smoker, so it was never going to be my thing. But I was surprised myself where for a couple of weeks, I found myself quite happy to have more wine, even though it did slow me down. And so it needed that correction, and it correlated as well to being more prayerful for me. Encouraging people also, who do they contact if they're just not feeling great? We have a daughter in London at the moment. She's 28, and she's chosen to stay there at the moment. And so I've been learning a lot from her about what she's been doing, and some people try and develop some new habits during this time, and maybe even saying further, well, the language you wanted to learn. And so I think a lot of people have got more time on their hands. I think for those in pastoral ministry, it's not the case. There's actually more to do. And if you don't pick up the phone, they wonder where you are and why aren't you working and things like that. So, but from a ministry perspective, as John Piper said when he had cancer, don't waste your cancer. Maybe let's not waste COVID as well for some people. Encourage them to look at doing some things differently and developing their faith in a different way.
John, is there any advice about kids and exercise, or do the same kind of rules apply to? I know as I've rung around all the FIEC pastors, a lot of them have kids at home underfoot, and
well done there. That's very different. Look, we live in a neighbourhood where on either side of us there's young families, and they're handling it slightly differently. One is a very active family, and they're just taking every opportunity to go for walks and bike rides, and they have a dog and walk the dog, etc., etc. I think trying to do something, making sure that it's always fun is the key. I will send an infographic from the College of Sports Physicians on that, which will be helpful, but really, it's almost impossible to overdo physical activity with kids. I think it's even letting them take a bit of control. They may choose to see a fun exercise class on the internet, a dance move, a movie where they're looking at and you dance to the songs in it. So dance has pushed quite a lot, especially with kids at the moment. Yeah.
Well, it's 8 minutes past. I would just finish by asking, you're writing a book or have written a book on this, John?
Yeah.
When, how's about you give it a plug where it might be available or how we could get it or when we could know about it?
Yeah. So the working title is Man Health. So it's actually a men's health book, but turns out the purchasing audience will probably be females. Strategies to Live Well is the subtitle. It actually is completed. It's not large. It's going to be around 12,000 words. I'm adding a section on immune fitness, so healthy immune system. It got knocked back by one publisher, but I have an agent and he's pretty confident we'll get it up. So I think the time frame, if things go well, would be about 3 months.
Will it be an e-book or?
It will be an e-book as well. It's written for non-Christians. So in this handout, there are a few proverbs sprinkled in. So I do include them in the book. I come out as a Christian early. I talk about Jesus, really the way we're made as body, mind, spirit, and how he does promise us a full life, and that is different for everyone. And so I hope it's used as a reading tool with Christians and non-Christians together.
Okay. Well, when that's available, or when we know how we could get that, if you let us know, we'll circulate that information.
Appreciate that.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. And we'll, Dean, I'm assuming we can put all of that, the books, the references, etc., be available on the website as well when we put this up.
Mm.
Yep, definitely. It'll be up tomorrow.
And my
Good man.
only request as well, if there's any other questions, send them through. And if there are areas where you felt, and there's only so much you can cover in this time, but that I really did miss completely. Like I didn't talk about supplements, but I'll put that in a addendum. Please add that. And if there's something I was unclear, I'm happy to clarify. Thanks for your ministry, though, everybody.
So if you can send questions through to Dean, and Dean would redirect them. Is that okay, Dean?
Okay.
Yep, for sure.
Okay. All right. Thank you. How about I'll close our time in prayer, and thank you very much, John. Father, thank you for the wisdom you've given John, for the many years of experience in medicine and in leading people spiritually. And we pray, please, that we be careful and disciplined during this lockdown, and ask, please, that we would be able to lead and help others as well in this area. So we thank you for this time and John's wisdom in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.